Dr Reena here. I'm a global dental specialist and founder of RW Perio, located at 75 Harley Street. Welcome to season 3 of my podcast, Life and Smile, where we talk about everything dental, lifestyle, business, and much more. Every episode, I'm joining conversation with a specialist expert in their chosen field, who gives us a behind-the-scenes glimpse into their daily regime, career turning points, and an insider look at what they can't live without. As a businesswoman myself, it's so inspiring to hear how people have built their careers and shattered those glass ceilings. This third season is sponsored by Colgate. Committed to sustainability, they're obviously a household name, and as a dental expert, they're my personal fail-safe go-to to ensure my smile is always looking and feeling its healthiest. So let's get the conversation going. Now we're in season 3. You will have noticed that it's one of our key intentions here on the Life and Smile podcast to really bring together an ongoing, inspiring conversation, one that gives us the behind-the-scenes access to highly renowned figures across multiple industries. My personal favorite interviews are those working in the media industry, particularly as journalists or leading editors for globally recognized publications. Hardly needing an introduction, I'm so delighted to have finally brought her into our remote studio for this episode. As a former British Vogue editor, she is instantly recognised across the industry, often writing from a personal and lifestyle approach. She is now a contributing editor for Ep2, How to Spend It, and House and Garden. It is, of course, Fiona Golfar. Welcome to the podcast. So Fiona, I've given everyone, really great to have you here, and I've given everyone your sort of mini bio, but just take us back to the beginning. Tell us, how did everything begin?
Gosh, I wish my real bio read as well as my mini bio. I was just laughing as you were talking because my first crush that I ever had was on our family dentist.
Amazing.
And I would lie in the chair and he would look into my eyes, and I was sort of a very young teenager, and I think he loves me, and I think he was terrified of me because I was a girl with a teenage crush. He'd have been, he was terrified that my parents would get him into terrible trouble. But I used to long to go to the dentist just so that I could see him.
That's funny.
Sorry, I lost myself.
So tell us,
you wanted to know my
exactly
background.
How did it all start?
It all started, I'm the antithesis of almost any other journalistic story that I ever hear, because I was an appalling student. I went to, I think, about 11 schools by the time I was 16. I got 1 O-level. I was not remotely interested. I liked history and I liked reading books, and that was the only thing I was interested in. And my father said, if you're not going to get an education, I'm not going to pay for you to just muck about. Go and learn a trade, be a bricklayer. I don't care what you do, but go do something with your life. And I had a little bit of interest shown to me in the modelling world. I'd been asked to do some shoots, and I'd been asked to have my picture taken. And I really loved that kind of hair and makeup room, it's a very gossipy, friendly, warm, funny scene. So I went and saw one of the makeup artists I'd been working for, she was a kind of rather fabulous character called Yvonne Gold. She was 6'4", lived on All Saints Road in Notting Hill, and had dreadlocks all the way down her back. She was white, and she kept all her makeup brushes in her dreadlocks. And I said, can I come and be your assistant? And so I became a makeup artist. Not a very good one, but I became a makeup artist, and it allowed me to kind of learn that world. And I really liked it, and I really liked all the characters, and I loved the creativity, and I loved watching things coming together. Anyway, I did that for a few years. I probably did it for 10 years, and I got to live in Paris and Australia and LA, and off I went. And I had a boyfriend in my early 20s whose family were journalists, and I'd never really come across journalists before. And they talked about lots and lots of different things for about, I've now learned, for about the equivalent of 1,000 words. But they knew about everything that was going on, and I thought they were kind of fascinating. And my boyfriend's sister became the first female editor of GQ magazine.
Right.
And there was a whole kind of thing about a woman editing a men's magazine. And I used to say to her when she was at GQ, why don't you write a story about this? Or why don't you write a story about my friend who's a composer who's making a film? Or why don't you write a story about what women might really, what women would really want men to give them for Christmas. And she'd give me 50 quid and take me out for lunch. And I think that's a really good deal. All I have to do is say, why don't you? And I put 50 quid and a free lunch. So we had this sort of funny, I wasn't particularly close to her. I just would see her at family things and sort of say, why don't you? And then I remember, I think we broke up, and he said to me one day, oh, my sister is going up to be editor of Vogue. And I mean, she won't get it because she's like the least Vogue person you'll ever meet. She was like a boho, West London, kind of hippie, long skirts, Portobello Market shopping, you know, bohemian. And anyway, she got the job as the editor of Vogue, Alex Shulman. Yep. And about a year later, I was in the Vogue offices and I was showing my not particularly inspiring makeup portfolio. There was no way they were going to give me a job. And I ran into Alex in the corridor and I said, could I see your office? Like, what does the office of the editor of Vogue look like? And she said, yeah, come and see it. And I went into this office and there was a wall of images, pictures. And on it was a picture of Bono, who was huge at the time, U2. Yes. And he had a bare chest and leather trousers on, and Christy Turlington, who was one of the supermodels, and she also had a pair of leather trousers on. And she was turning around to look at the camera, and I kind of thought that was the most exciting wall of images I'd ever seen. I just was so taken by it. And I said to her, I don't ever want to have to put lipstick on a model again. I think I'll shove my brush up their nose. I just don't want to do it. Can I come here and make coffee? And she just looked at me and said, I don't think you should come here and make coffee, but why don't you come here 3 days a week and see if you have any ideas? And it was just, wow. You know, I tell that story a lot because I think it was the most incredible. It was her instinct. Yes. It certainly wasn't my talent. Right. But to have somebody see something in you and to give you the chance to develop that thing is an enormous thing. And that's how I got to Vogue. And I walked in. I've never been so frightened in my life on my first day because I was completely unqualified to do anything. And I cannot tell you what the rest of the staff must have thought about me.
Amazing.
You know, it was, you know, first of all, a friend of Alex. Second of all, I didn't know how to switch on a computer. Yep. Once I had switched on a computer, I didn't know what to do. You know, it was a complete instinct of hers and terror of mine. Anyway, that lasted 26 years.
Incredible. Wow, what a story.
That's how it all began.
Incredible. I mean, how did you make it work? How did you then, you're in the deep end.
I then used to stare at the clock. Yeah, I remember I'd stare at the clock and there was a terrifying features editor who I was put to work in. It was the days at Vogue where it was full of people like Izzy Blow, I don't know if you remember her, who discovered Alexander McQueen, and it was full of these sort of amazing eccentrics, and the journalists were very blue-stocking, Oxford, Cambridge, and then there was me. And I had basically gone to a nightclub while they were going to university. And one day, and I just would sit looking at the clock thinking, what am I doing here? What was I thinking? And they were all thinking the same thing, I think. And I had a best friend, a childhood best friend, who had married this young, aspiring film producer. And he said to me one day, I'm making this film. I don't know. It could be that there's this girl in it and she was a model, and it might be that she'd be interesting for Vogue. And do you think Vogue would be interested in doing? And I ran down the corridor. I was like, oh, my friend's making a film, and what about? And they said yes. They wouldn't let me go on the shoot, and they wouldn't let me go anywhere near it because I didn't know what to do. But the film was called 4 Weddings and a Funeral. Right. And it became probably the biggest film of the decade. Yes. And I suddenly kind of realized that it wasn't what I could learn in the magazine. It was the life I'd lived outside the magazine. Right. And I started bringing in the people I'd met in the clubs, in my funny kind of mad world that I'd been going to since I was a teenager, was full of kind of creative, artistic, interesting, demented people, but it fed into what was happening at the time, you know, and I was in the right place at the right time, and I'd met this kind of funny, eclectic mix of people, and I brought all of my world to the magazine.
That's so interesting.
And tried to kind of bring that.
Yeah, And do you find actually that having that sort of, because I'm also like, I try not to see it as work and home. It's just a lifestyle approach. Everything's merged into one. And, it's not a clear distinction. And as you said, people that were in your sort of social circle, you then brought into your work circle. Do you find that's the best approach? Like trying to just see it as one whole 360 thing rather than this is work, this is play.
I've never been able to see it as work.
Yeah.
I think because I was so complete. I think my lack of training was my greatest asset,
right.
And I learned that. And I think that I have a very, I'd always had a very curious nature, and I'd always really liked people. And I think that I kind of think that's the reader as well. I kind of realized that if I was interested in it, somebody else was interested in it. If I was enthusiastic about something, somebody else might be enthusiastic about it. I still have this sort of funny relationship with people where people call me up and say, well, who's a good, that's every sentence starts with, who's a good, like it might be who's a good hairdresser, who's a good stylist, who's a good dentist, who's a good, because I'm curious about what's out there, I kind of feed it back to people. That's my nature.
Right.
And I think that's what a magazine is doing. Actually, that's what the job of a magazine is, to feed back a sort of level of, it wasn't a high level either, because my level was quite low level but it reflected the times, and it was reflecting what was going on, and it was reflecting my interests, sort of were shared interests. So that was something I think I've always held on to. I'm terrible at sort of following up with a PR or following up with I don't do that.
Interesting you said about your lack of training was an asset. On that note, for someone who is kind of starting up in their career and they also feel like I have no idea what I'm doing initially, what would be your advice to them? Or if you had to talk to your younger self in that office looking at the clock thinking, gosh, not sure what I'm doing here, what would you now say to your younger self or someone else starting off?
I think always be curious. And I think maybe do your homework would be something I would say to my younger self, because I would have saved myself a lot of, for me, the hardest thing was believing that I wanted to write, because I didn't want other people to tell the stories that I was finding, but I had no training. And the best advice that I was ever given, which I would pass on to a younger self, if you want to be a writer, which is something that I think I'm quite pleased with the writer that I've become, because I have a conversational style of writing. So people can hear. So I met a girl when I was about 17. I had another boyfriend, my first boyfriend, and I was on a football pitch, probably the only time I've ever been on one, and I was watching him play, and it started to rain, and a girl standing next to me said, "It's raining, do you want to come and sit in my car?" So I went and sat in this girl's car, and she said, "My name's Nigella," and I said, "My name's Fiona." And Nigella and I have been friends since we were teenagers.
Right.
And I remember wanting to write, and I said to Nigella, "I just don't know how to do it. I haven't been trained, and I haven't been to university, and I haven't been to..." And Nigella sat there and she looked at me and she said, "Just tell me." And that is my advice to anybody who ever wants to try and write. And I say it to myself when I start every piece, just tell me. So as if I was sitting with a friend, telling them a story, and then I just write it down. I worry about the spelling later. So I think find your voice and just don't overthink it. Just tell a friend, and then it comes.
Fantastic.
That's my advice to my younger self. No, brilliant. Don't sweat it too much. Just tell me.
Yeah, be real and genuine. Don't overthink it.
Be real.
Yeah,
be real.
No, love it.
Yeah, if you overthink it, you're in terrible trouble.
Yeah. So you've been in the working.
Don't wing it if you're a dentist.
Yeah,
I would say that.
That's very good advice.
Don't do it if you're a dentist. Yes. I don't think it's very good advice to a dentist. Definitely
overthink. Yeah, overthink
learn
it.
Your trade. Yeah, overthink it. Think very hard before you start on my teeth, please. Yeah.
So working in the world of magazines, do you have any personal favorite subjects that you like being involved in, or pieces that have really stood out that have had a huge impact over the years?
I think there have been some. I mean, I've had such an amazingly privileged career there. It was, every story you embark on is for me I was always sort of quite scared at the beginning, but that's my nature. And I think if you're not scared and apprehensive, then you're not doing your job properly. But I had amazing stories that came out of it. I mean, I did so many things that were total kind of cock-ups. And one of the great things about working on a magazine, and I remember when I first got there, where people said, whatever happens, we've got your back. And that's because you're literally going out into the field and you're representing Vogue. It's a very big title to take with you. But, I had some really funny times. I remember doing a story. I started doing these stories that were like, I'd go to the Oscars and I'd do a portfolio of all the actors at the Oscars. So you've got to have all your personality to deal with all of their personalities, right? So you've got to persuade these people. You've got 5 minutes, because we at Vogue, at British Vogue particularly, we had about 3p to put these stories together on. Always these tiny budgets. So you'd be practically kind of like going on a bicycle from one end of LA to the other, trying to get people to do things. And you had 5 minutes to persuade them to get a photograph taken and do it in the best time. Anyway, I was in Paris and I was doing a story on the couture shows from the outside in, and so in other words, looking at the women who bought the clothes, the women who attended the shows, the designers, but not as a fashion journalist. Right. And I was doing portraits of all the designers, and I went to do a portrait of the designer at Givenchy, and it was quite terrifying because the fashion crowd right within that world are quite a daunting crew, and I wasn't right within that world. I was a writer on the outside, and the idea was we were going to take the designer. He was called Julian MacDonald. It was a long time ago. He had a very kind of punky stage for his couture show. The couture shows cost hundreds and hundreds of thousands to put on. Right. And it was like a rooftop scene, and it was a scaffolding scene, and this little punky Julian MacDonald, I wanted him to climb up the scaffolding and hang from the scaffolding like a kind of wild boy. And I said to him, and across this scaffolding in pink neon, it said Hotel Givenchy, which must have cost them, whatever to put up. And I said, oh, Julian, this is what I'd like you to do for the shot. And I go to climb up the scaffolding to show him what I want him to do. And the pointy tip of my stiletto goes into the neon sign, and the whole sign goes and kind of blows up an hour before the couture show in Paris.
Oh my goodness.
And I just saw my life flash before my eyes. And I came down and I turned to my assistant and I said, how bad is what I've just done? And he just held up 10 fingers to me. He said, it's a 10. That's how bad it is. And I called my editor, Alex, and I said, I think I might have destroyed the Givenchy show. I think I've destroyed the set. And she said, oh, don't worry about it. Go and get something to eat, she said. And I came back an hour later and they'd found a new sign and it was all fixed and, everything was... So I loved all the drama of it. 1 minute you think you're going to be murdered by a fashion posse and the next minute you've done the best shoot you've ever done in your life, and that's the excitement of it and the adrenaline of it. And then at the end of all of it, you're all standing back in that room in front of that board and you're seeing those pictures and you've all done it together. And it's kind of an amazing moment when you see it all laid out and you think everyone's had an adventure like that along the way to produce this magazine that you're so proud of. Yeah. So it was amazing.
Wow. That's a lot of adrenaline. I guess, yes, you said.
It's always a lot of adrenaline.
Yeah, it's the fun of it and the fact that anything can change any second, but it also you can pivot and sort things out as well. And you don't,
that's the job.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the job.
Wow, what a story. So obviously, you've been...
so many of those stories.
In the industry, both commercial and I guess the editorial landscapes have changed so dramatically over the past decade as well, with the kind of demand for instant access, fast-paced content. During that time, and what would you say it would be your sort of proudest career kind of moment with things changing so much over the last decade?
Well, it's been a very interesting last decade for me because I came out of Vogue at a it was a really interesting time historically. So magazines have never been in a more precarious place. And I think, I was reading something not long ago about if you're, to be honest, I was bored in the last 5 years that I was at Vogue. And because I'd been there a really long time, not because of Vogue, but just like there's only, you can reinvent the wheel. Essentially, it's a wheel and you've got to turn it around. Yeah. So I was a bit bored, and I read something about how that is your brain telling you it's time to make a change.
Right.
It was very much at a time where everybody was saying, oh, Vogue's going to get sold, or Vogue isn't this, or Vogue isn't that. It's like it's a brand that's so strong, and it's going to be bigger than anybody who's involved with it forever. Mm-hmm. So I think maybe the thing I'm proudest of was having the courage to step away from the mothership, because I didn't think I was defined by Vogue, but I was mistaken. Of course I was defined by Vogue. It was like a marriage, I was in it for a very long time, and you're defined by any long relationship. So I think what I became proudest of was definitely when I stepped away, there was a sort of period of grief and mourning, and also everything happened, Black Lives Matter happened, Me Too happened, the culture that I'd worked in came under fire, the people that I worked with came under fire, the whole show came under fire. But what I realized, and this is what I'm really proud of, is that I have been taught to use the muscle that is my brain, my creative brain. It's good, and that I know that it's good. And I realized that my brain could go in all sorts of other directions, not just Vogue, but in all sorts of other directions. So, a lot of the people who had worked at Vogue, the editor of Have Spend It, Joe Ellison, had been our features director for a long time. So I started working with them, and it was great because it was a fresh, different way of looking at things. But also I started doing other projects. I realized that there was so much I could do, and that I wasn't just pigeonholed into that. And I think I'm really proud of realizing that.
Yes.
That I was more than just the brand.
Yeah.
Because I was so grateful to it for so long.
Yeah.
I was so grateful to the whole kind of idea of being a part of Vogue. It was such a special thing. But I thought, if I ever thought that it was all I was wrong. I was myself, and I realized that I'd brought my asset to them.
Yeah. Makes complete sense.
So I was proud of myself for realizing that.
No, for sure. And I guess I like the fact that when you said at a certain point that either you're bored or you kind of know inside that perhaps this is the end of this chapter of my career and it's time to move on to another chapter as such. But yeah, I found that kind of going with your gut feeling, and you can just feel when you've contributed as much as you can, and ready to always push yourself and go out your comfort zone, I guess, for the next stage. I know you mentioned earlier about.
It's really important. I went to see a therapist, actually. Sorry, I went to see a therapist, and I said I'm thinking about leaving, but I don't know. And she said, "Tell me about how you feel about leaving. Tell me about how you feel about staying." And I did, and she said, "I'm just going to describe what your body did. You leant back when you talked about staying, but you leant forward when you talked about leaving." And I got up from her sofa and I phoned the office and resigned.
Oh, how
that's gut. Sorry,
body language. Yeah, no, for sure, absolutely. So you mentioned earlier about sitting in the car with Nigel Lawson, telling her about the stuff you want to write about and just saying it as it is. Obviously, and throughout your career, you've had a lot of key people who have taken you to the next stage and helped you along. Would you say, like, in terms of what's inspired you to achieve so much, would you say that you have like a specific inspiration or mentor, or what keeps you going to that level to want to give you 100% every single day?
Well, I think I've definitely had a mentor in Alex Shulman. I mean, she was a huge mentor for me in the Vogue days. and I will always be eternally grateful and devoted to her. And actually, we still work together, so that's nice. We're developing a TV show set in the world of a magazine.
Incredible.
Which is fun. But I think you kind of, you find mentors along the way. When I came out of Vogue, I'd photographed a woman who was the producer. I'd photographed her for something I did for Vogue, who was the producer of the Star Wars movie, called Kathleen Kennedy. And she gave me unbelievably kind of good advice about going into my new life. And so I think you find different people who are necessary to you at different times in your life, for sure. I mean, she's not a sort of everyday mentor, but I just remember her saying things like, I was trying to come up with story ideas for something, and she said, steal from the best. And I thought, there are only 7 stories in the world or something. You may as well just look at all the best ones and say, I like those themes, or, you don't have to steal their work, but you look, from Shakespeare to, I don't know, Lena Dunham, you can find interesting people having interesting thoughts and allow them to trigger you. So I think that was a very good piece of advice that she gave me. And I think I've had all sorts of mentors in all sorts of different areas of my life. I like older people. I like to hear what they've learned and what. But I'm also really, I said it earlier, I'm really curious, and I think my own curiosity is what drives me.
Yeah, for sure.
And I want to tell stories. I want to tell stories, and so I like having platforms on which I can tell my stories.
And people love to listen to stories. So yeah, amazing.
Well.
And what's your kind of so obviously you're now contributing editor. What's your current sort of day-to-day routine? Like, do you have a set time you do certain things, or is every day different? Tell us more about your day-to-day now.
Day-to-day is very different because, and I think probably like a lot of people out there, or maybe people listening, I no longer go to an office every day. So first of all, I've got a sort of semi-redundant wardrobe sitting upstairs, because going to Vogue every day was fun, because you got to put your kit on, and I had a sort of constant uniform of black, and I've got these gold bangles, and but I love getting dressed. And now, on an average day, I'm at my kitchen table, and I'm writing, or I'm out, and if I'm out doing a story, it's not always the most, I don't have to be in that same kind of dressed up thing. And I slightly miss that. I miss the camaraderie of an office. I know you've had Sarah Harris, I think.
Yes, we have.
Have you had Sarah Harris on your show?
Yeah.
I love Sarah. I'm still very much in touch with Sarah. I used to go into the office and I used to stand behind Sarah at her desk, and I used to plait her hair. I always used to fiddle with Sarah's hair, or, and while standing and plaiting Sarah's hair, I'd be saying, why don't we do something about whatever? Right. And stories would evolve. Yeah. And that's what's great about working in an office. And actually, I still sometimes call Sarah and say, what do you think about? Because we're all friends, yes, even if we're not in the same magazine. The friendships that I made were incredible. And I remember, I'd sit at my desk and I'd hear somebody saying, let's do something behind me. And I'd turn around and go, but what about if we do it like this, but we do that? And so what I miss about being in office is that sort of alchemy that happens when a group of people who are creative think about something, and it starts off as A, but it ends up as Z wearing green or something. Yeah. That's what I miss, is that kind of groupiness of it. What I don't miss is, wearing high heels probably, or something like that. I don't miss that at all. But I've forgotten what your question was, really. So my day is probably I get up, I write nearly every day. Okay. I do the same things that I ever did. I do meetings and Zoom, and I'm probably fitter and healthier than I ever was, because I'm not doing ladies who lunch every 5 minutes, which was a big part of my job. Going out, meeting people, hearing their stories, what are they doing? But I work in the same. My husband works from home as well, which is something I've never ever done, which is work in the same space as my husband, and we're working together. So I've really kind of learning a new language of how to not kill him, and how to give it, how to work in a kind of shared space. So
Yeah.
I do that, and no, my life's great. I have a really interesting and much more varied life, actually. As I was saying, I'm working across film and TV and theatre.
Yeah.
He's a theatre producer and we do stuff together now. So it's a whole different world. And we spent a lot of time in Cornwall in lockdown. And in lockdown, towards the end of it, a lot of the community that I met, that were my local community, who maybe I didn't know so well. I've lived down there, I've been going down there for 25 years, but I really got to know my community before and after lockdown because we spent so long there and between the lockdowns. And Cornwall's full of these incredibly talented potters, ceramicists, weavers, basket makers, you name it, regenerative farmers, all of them who went into a kind of terrible time during COVID and didn't know how to sell, couldn't sell to restaurants or couldn't sell shops. Because I'm a journalist and I have a way of getting people's messages out, we started a sort of community market and a community thing all through, starting with Instagram, but working with a lot of local people. And I think that was probably one of the most rewarding projects I've ever done. Really kind of seeing how brilliant, talented people and knowing that my skills could help highlight their skills. That was a really nice, really rewarding project.
Giving them the platform to actually display their
and
skills.
I would never have thought of myself. Yeah, and it was really touching, John the Potter and Vivian the indigo dyer, and I could get them to a world that didn't know about them, and that world were good, and it was like a magazine. I could help them sell, but also for me, it was like if you told me at Vogue that I would end up running a community market in Cornwall for a year, I'd have sort of, my eyes would have rolled into the back of my head. I think it's the most rewarding thing I've ever done. So it's funny what life gives you.
Yes. Open mind, keep an open mind. I know you're...
Everything's interesting.
Yeah, really good advice. I know you're super busy, so I don't want to keep you too long, but I have one more question for you. So we always ask our guests if there are 3 things that we would always find on your desk, or 3 things that are always part of your mini survival kit in your handbag, what would they be?
On my desk, you always find a scented candle.
Right.
I've always got a candle burning. There's always flowers and there's always candle. So I have a scented candle. Today I've got one by Solange Azaguri, who's a friend of mine, who's a jeweler. I've got her scent. Usually I try to always burn candles by Perfumer H, who is somebody called Lynn Harris, who I wrote about recently for the Ep2. I absolutely love her scents. She actually designs Solange's scents as well. There's always a scented candle. Well, there's always I've got a thing that I always had on my desk at Vogue, and it's pinned to the wall, and it was, I saw it on the desk of somebody called Louise Wilson when I interviewed her at St Martin's. She was she was an absolutely kind of famous teacher at St Martin's, taught people like Alexander McQueen, and I interviewed her, and she was quite a terrifying character, but I liked her. And she had this thing above her desk that I copied, and it's basically a printout. Am I allowed to swear?
Yeah, of course.
On your podcast?
Yes, no problem.
Am I allowed to use bad language? Basically, it's a whole list. It just says, fucking work hard, fucking get on with it, fucking stop complaining, fucking put your head down, fucking say thank you.
Love it.
It's a very, very good list of how to just fucking well get on with it.
Yeah. Love it.
And so I've got that as a reminder every day to just fucking get on with it.
Yeah.
And I've always got my trusty water bottle on my desk. So that's what's on my desk. And usually my cat these days, because the cat likes to come and sit right next to my laptop.
Pleasures
of my cat on my desk.
Lovely. Pleasures of working from home.
Worth
very nice. Amazing.
Yeah.
Well, Fiona, thank you so much. That was such an inspirational conversation. So many nuggets of wisdom to take away for all of the listeners. Where can we find you? Are there any exciting new projects that we can look out for? I know you mentioned quite a few things already, but where can the listeners sort of stay in tune with what you're up to?
Well, you can. I mean, I don't know. You can find my. You can. Where can you find me? God, I don't know. You can find me. You can follow my Cornish life on Instagram, or
Yeah.
um, you can find me in How to Spend It. I think it's not called How to Spend It anymore. I think it's called HTSI
Right.
because it's been rebranded. So, but I've always got something in there, and I'm always. I'm easy to find. You just have to look for me. It's not that hard. I'm a big noise.
Well, thank you so much, and really hope to see you in person in Harley Street soon.